Hi, this is Mr. Weinstein, Richmond High School Personal Finance. Over the next 2 months or so, we're going to be doing online lessons, as you know. And I want you to understand that this may be a good thing in many ways. For example, when we have class in school, you may forget the lesson 2 days later. It's gone. Or you may only remember a little bit of the lesson. Also, sometimes we're distracted at school. Telephone rings, you need to pass to the bathroom, kids are talking. You can easily get distracted. But when we do this online, there's no distraction. You can watch this lesson over and over again, and you can do it at your own pace within limits. Okay, I know you must finish this lesson, I believe, within a few days, but you have time. Also, I'd like to tell you that this is good in the long run for you because in the future, in college, you'll have distance learning. In fact, they already do that a lot more than we do. And who knows what happens next year. So this is good preparation for the future. And we know that things change. So in any case, this lesson is going to be our first lesson, and it is called What is Credit? Okay, I want you to think for a second. You know, I'm sure all of you have had somebody come up to you and say, "Hey, can I borrow some money?" And many times you may say, "Okay," but the next thing you're going to do is say, "Hey, when are you going to pay me back?" Or you may say, "I want you to pay back at a certain time." Well, that's kind of like what credit is. You can see here the definition of credit. It says credit is your ability to borrow money for a promise to repay in the future. So it's not much different than your friend asking for money. You lend the money, that person borrows it, and they pay you back in the future. Okay? But there is a difference between borrowing money from a friend and borrowing money to buy something at a store. When you use credit and you borrow money, there's something called a trade-off. A trade-off is related to an opportunity cost. If you get something, in a trade-off, you have to give something. And that's why we call it a trade-off. If I get, I have to give. For example, I'm paid to be a teacher. So I have to teach and do something like what I'm doing now. So when you use credit, when you borrow money, there's something that you're giving up, and we're going to talk about that right now. When we borrow, we have to pay interest. It's a fee that we pay for borrowing money, and it's only fair. They just don't lend money to you for free. You have to pay a price, and that's the trade-off that you'll be expected to pay. And the problem is, this trade-off can be very expensive. And it all depends on the fee they charge or the interest rate. Okay? So the more of an interest rate that you have, the more that you're going to have to pay in the future. So let's look at this diagram over here. If you paid 4.625% as an interest rate, what's your monthly payment? Well, it's $1,285. You can see it right there. But let's look when we increase the interest rate. Look at the payments. At 4.75%, it goes up to $1,304. And then if you look at 6.5% interest, it's now $1,580. So you can see that the higher the interest rate, the more you have to pay. And you have to pay that in the future, which means your future is going to have to pay, meaning more work. You have to make that up. And that is the trade-off, is that the higher the interest, the more you're going to have to pay. The next thing we want to look at now is the benefits of owning a home. Now, why would we bring up owning a home when it comes to credit? You came to the right place. For most of us, the largest loan that we'll ever have to pay is for a home loan. And home loans usually are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. How many of us have hundreds of thousands of dollars to pay? Not I. I have $40 in my wallet, maybe. So we need a big loan to buy a home. And there's a reason why we might want to buy a home on credit rather than not buy and rent. And let's look at that. The question is, what are the benefits of owning a home? When you own a home, it's yours. Whatever you put into it, say you put in $70,000 of your money, paying off a loan, that's called equity. It's your worth, your value, okay? You own a portion of it. When you rent a home, there's no equity because the equity is given to the landlord. So when you own a home, you build equity. So yes, you're going to borrow for a home. You'll need to borrow for a home, but you'll build equity, ownership, value. And in time, that value will help you in the future. So credit can help you out. And let's look at this picture here. This gives you a good visual of what happens to the value of your home when you build your equity. It will be worth more to you. In fact, many people buy a home to invest because later they're going to sell it to make more money on it. You can't do that when you rent. So if you and I can't afford to buy a home with the money we have now, you and I will need to use credit to get that home. Now, there are going to be some questions that you have to ask yourself before you borrow money, credit. I ask myself these 4 important questions. You need to remember these for the assessment because they are very important questions. Let's look at the first question. First, is it important to buy this now? Example. I had a student, or I have a student, who couldn't decide whether to buy a car to get to work or to buy a drone. He wanted the drone because it was nice to take videos and he really liked it. But he knew the car was more important. And you have to ask these questions when you borrow. Is it important? For example, an emergency. If your refrigerator breaks down, and we know during this crisis, the money may not be there and your refrigerator breaks. That's important, right? And this is where credit can help you because you may not have the cash now. The stimulus check may not have come, but you need the refrigerator now. So ask yourself, do I need it now? The next question is, do I have to borrow to buy it? If I just need to buy 2 slices of pizza, why would I buy on credit? It's $5, and that's that. I don't want to have to pay more money in the future for something I already have the money for. So you must ask yourself, do I have to borrow to buy it? Well, a house you would, and a car, for most of us, you'd have to borrow. Okay? Understand? Next question. Can I afford to make the loan payments? Okay. Let's suppose you do buy that refrigerator that you need. Will you be able to pay that back in the future? If you can't pay it back, you'll be in big trouble and you'll have problems with credit in the future. So you have to think about, can I pay this back? Okay? And you got to go over these questions because there are 4 of them that you must ask. And you should do this every time you borrow. The last question that you should ask yourself is, will I be able to buy other products I want more if I borrow to buy this? So if you use a credit card on something or you get a loan for something, what happens if you need something else even more? Okay? If I need to buy a car, do I really need to buy the stereo? Because I need the car more than I need the stereo. You see? So you have to think about what things you need more of a necessity. All right? Okay, we're getting close to the end of the lesson. I think there's an important rule that you all should know. It's a general rule, but the rule is this. You should never spend more than 20 to 25% of your net income. If you remember, net income is what you see on your paycheck. Okay? It's what you can actually take home from your pay. So if I make $1,000 in 1 month, how much can I, as a general rule, borrow from it? Think. That's right. The most I could borrow would be $250 or maybe $200. You really shouldn't borrow more than, say, 20 to 25% of your monthly income when you borrow for things. So keep that in mind. That's an important rule, and I'm going to ask you that later. Okay? And finally, credit is going to affect your budget. You may remember we talked about budgeting in the past. It's a plan for saving and spending. But the moment you start borrowing money, that's now going to affect your budget, your monthly budget. And how does it affect it? Well, let's take a look. You'll remember that your budget had fixed expenses and variable expenses. The fixed expenses, like rent or some specific bill that stays the same, you have no control over. It's all the time. It's fixed. It stays the same. When you get a loan, most loans are fixed. You have to pay a certain amount each month. So that's going to affect how you spend your variable expenses. You'll have to change them. So let's look above me. So for example, if you expected to have $250 for gifts, if you have a loan, your variable expenses will have to be lowered to $150 maybe, because your fixed expenses increased. Okay? So your variable expenses will have to change when you borrow. Okay? That's in the assessment. Make sure you remember that. Okay? Let's go on. And our final question, our last question of the lesson is, what does it mean to use credit responsibly or wisely? Being smart about credit. Think about that. What kind of things do we have to do? Well, when you use credit responsibly, you have to plan, first of all. Okay? You want to plan. As a teacher, I have to plan a lesson before I teach it. I'm paid. I can't just do it off my head, although sometimes I can. But I do want to have a general plan. And if you're going to use credit, you have to have a plan. You have to think about all these things ahead of the time. You have to remember about your budget. I told you, your variable expenses are going to change. And so are your fixed because of the loan. So you're going to have to look at your budget and say, can I afford this? And then finally, and most importantly, you have to be smart and be wise and think. Can I borrow this? Should I spend for this? Sometimes credit is wonderful. Like right now, you might need to get that refrigerator, or you might need to get a car when you don't have the money right now because you need to get to work. So there are times when you need to have credit, and there are other times it's not smart. So you have to think wisely. And I think that it would be wise for you to go over this entire video whenever you don't remember something, because you can learn from this. So that's the end of our first lesson. My other lessons will be like this. You'll be taking an assessment on this. It will be a form that you fill out on Teams, and I will upload a PDF file of the lesson. So if there are any questions, go to the files and find that file for lesson 1 and watch the video again. And I think you'll be fine. All right? Okay. Do your lesson because it's going to be graded. Okay? This is still school. Be safe, and I'll see you at lesson 2.